Hi folks, welcome to Code and Concrete, where we share the latest trends and the stories of trailblazers in the built environment. We hope you gain some insight from our wide range of topics, such as real estate development and sustainability, or blockchain, artificial intelligence, and data. Joining us today is Ethan Berg. Ethan is the founder and CEO of Agora World, a no-code platform revolutionizing 3D visualization and simulation. With a background in XR, AI, and geospatial tech, Ethan has delivered innovative solutions for clients like the University of Pennsylvania, Hyundai and Audi, and the US Department of Defense. He's partnered with AWS and Oracle to co-create AI-powered infrastructure maintenance tools and has earned grants from NVIDIA, Groq, is it Groq? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, Groq.
And Cesium. Ethan's mission is to democratize access to 3D and spatial technology, enabling businesses to visualize and interact with their data in groundbreaking ways. Well, Ethan, I'm really glad to have you on the show. Data is a big portion of what we do at Building, and we need to bring down the technical barrier of how people can collect and read that data to make it actionable. And I think that's exactly what you're doing with digital twins.
Yeah, no, it's 100%. I mean, they've always said data is the new gold, right? So no disagreement there. I think that we're entering a world where it's not as much the data that's important, the intelligence that's derived from it is probably going to become more and more important as we move forward, of course, right? Like, what do you actually do with the data rather than just having a ton of it? But the more data we have, the better, because everything is becoming synthetic now, which is a big training limitation, of course. So we kind of need more. So yeah, no, it's thanks for having me. I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, and it was great that you and I first met in Silicon Valley, actually, January of 2024. We had been flown out for the North American finalist rounds of the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park's pitch competition.
Yeah.
And we got to talk about prop tech and then eventually make it out to Hong Kong, which was awesome.
Yeah, no, that was incredible. Definitely an incredible experience. A lot of really good things to learn. I mean, I don't know about you, but just like the experience being in Hong Kong in itself, there was a lot of things that I realized that was there that our society hasn't necessarily caught up on yet. Like, I guess two of them that stand out to me. Number one, efficiency. Everything is like on the dot. And it's all fully automated. Train systems, like all those sort of things were just so simple. And I'd say like clean. Like that would be the other one of just, it felt like there was no trash, dirt, things like that. And I feel like, those are at least two issues that are pretty pressing in my city that I feel like we're always constantly trying to, like, how do we do better at this? So I think there was just a lot of interesting learnings from being out there.
Yeah, I remember that we went back and forth a couple of times complimenting the city on how meticulously designed it is.
Yeah.
At one point, we were taking a tram up to Victoria's Peak, and you really notice the verticality of the city and how careful urban planning has to be in order to overlap all of the roads and the walkways and the buildings, and you're building into the mountain itself. And I mean, the amount of design, architecture, and engineering knowledge that has to go into something like that is actually really impressive and disappointing that the US seems to lag in these areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of great things that we've done. I definitely don't want to shoot down the US in that regard, but I'd say that, but I don't think there's anyone that would disagree. Our infrastructure is definitely outdated. Like, it's crumbling, constantly needs maintenance and construction, and then it's closed for 12 months to get that redone. It's like it just feels like it takes forever, I would say, in order for it to become new, and like that to me just feels a little frustrating. But they've done a great job, that's for sure.
Yeah, and even the infrastructure and public transportation. I mean, if this was the US, you'd get to the top and there would be tons of parking lots that would just flatten the mountain so that everyone could park their cars. But we were able to take that tram up, and it was a beautiful view. I don't think it was super expensive, probably equivalent to what you pay for a parking ticket there or here in the US. And I mean, just overseeing the city and all the skyscrapers, well worth it.
Not unlike America, though. I do believe they had either a Burger King or McDonald's up at the top. So,
of course, well, globalization.
Gotta love it.
So I'm really interested in how you initially got into digital twins, because you certainly have a passion for urban planning and how we're building and visualizing our cities. And so walk us through what the story was in your life to bring you to this uh, crossroads of data, computer design, and real estate.
Gladly. So let's see. First trek into tech was 2017. Was working at a computer vision company, working primarily with retailers. So we were working with Neiman Marcus, Home Depot, Walmart to identify products, mainly hard things to identify, like nuts and bolts, slice acquisitions, actually. And so I was doing a lot of like product testing, business development, things like that, which was really, really interesting learnings. Brand new tech at that time too, so very cutting edge there. And that was while I was a student. And so after leaving that role, I ended up going and building a VR shopping platform. That was the first one from my understanding. That was essentially multiplayer in-store shopping online, fully integrated with Shopify and Amazon. So you could pick up a product, look at it, you can open it up, you get reviews, all this kind of fun stuff, put in your cart, and it will literally ship to your house when you walk out the door. You'll check out. And so it worked, but it was early. No one had 3D models of their products other than for manufacturing, and taking 3D scans of environments was really, really difficult. Again, foraying into digital twins. How do you recreate physical environments? That was extremely resource intensive back then, still getting better, way better than it was, but it's still tedious today. So because of that experience, ended up going and building out essentially no-code metaverse tools after COVID hit. So, I was building that pre-COVID, so everyone thought I was crazy. Oh, VR, what are you doing? And so, COVID hits, people pivot towards events and needing a way to interact. And some of the infrastructure we built for that product aligned well. So we pivoted our tool sets to enable people to interact with one another in a real world way. Fast forward about 3 years, we enabled teams to drag and drop build about 5,000 experiences, give or take. And ultimately, we took a look at our data and realized that 20% of the experiences were reflecting the real world, but that those 20% led to about 80% of the continuing business, meaning like they would be coming back to do more, to use it more frequently, to have more people that would traffic it over time, to go and build another experience similar to that. They were the most successful, plain and simple. So training simulations, retail environments that reflected the real world, showrooms, even conferences, like things like that. So we pivoted towards that and started looking at geospatial tech, I guess, back in 2023. I actually knew, so are you familiar with Cesium?
Not personally. Please
All
explain.
right, yeah. So Cesium. They're essentially the open source standard for geospatial. If you're looking at building anything 3D with the real world and you're not starting with Cesium, I think you're making a mistake, is kind of the way that I would say it. Like, again, there's so many great things to add on top of theirs. Like they've built theirs in an incredible way, full open standards. If you've seen Google Immersive View, based in Cesium, powered by them. So they're tremendous. And so I know Patrick. They're Philly people. Actually, Cesium just got bought by Bentley recently, which is really cool. And so I knew him because his wife was trying to learn more about what he was doing. And so he sent her to my no code. I ran a meetup like once a week, just like, come learn how to build 3D, how to use it, all this kind of stuff. So I got to meet her and interact with her a few times and build together, actually, which was cool. And geospatial tech at that time was still really, really hard. Like it's a technical barrier. If you want to build digital twins, if you want to create something that looks physically real, like the real world around you, you better be a developer or have a budget to hire one. That's a massive barrier. And so I went to Cesium and Patrick and was just kind of like, hey, like, why is this so difficult? Like, I think this is something we could change. And so they actually gave us a grant, which pushed us in the direction of, well, let's elevate our tools. Like, don't have to bring your own 3D models now. Like, how could we make it so that we could help you create that 3D model using data that already exists? And at this point, our tool, you can type in a address or location. We have the terrain and topography for the entire planet. And then we've got infrastructure and buildings for, I think it's 4,000 cities in 56 countries now. And those are generated in give or take 1 minute on average. Depends on the internet speed, I will say. But about 1 minute on average for any given location, and fully scalable. So you can jump from one city to another seamlessly. You can leave a building in this city and then go put another building in another city, and you would have one seamless project, let's say, that doesn't break despite the distance between the two things. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Sorry if that was too long of an intro.
When you say that it generates in 1 minute, what is it generating from? Where is that data coming from?
Yeah, so we're pulling it from multiple different sources. Again, Cesium's the main base. So they've essentially, what Cesium's done is worked with, or they've helped consolidate rather, a bunch of the open 3D tile data sets that are available through, satellites, drones, helicopters that are using capture, like mainly LiDAR capture, photogrammetry, things like that. So, Google Tiles is something that we offer. Maxar Aerometrics has custom scans that they take with drones as well. That's a layer that we offer. So, we let our users decide on the level of fidelity, but we ourselves are not capturing our own data at the moment, at least. That's something we're considering getting into in the next couple of weeks, actually.
Yeah, the level of detail is interesting because there's certainly a spectrum out there. I mean, basic Google Maps might have the external information about what the world looks like as we would see it, and then it's a little chunky and blocky in many areas because they're not actually on the ground. What is your solution to adding in more details? I mean, imagine that a city, a municipality is trying to really detail all of their assets or their properties that they're overseeing and the assets that the managers are operating on. How do you start to integrate those?
Yeah, so I think that there's multiple different parts of this that people need to get right. So on one end, you've got the base layer being like you've got the ground, right? You kind of have to start there. From there, you've got the built environment. In that built environment, you've got multiple different aspects from three-dimensional, meaning like roads, buildings, telecommunications, energy systems and storage, transportation, whatever it might be. So physical. You've got environmental, which would include weather, natural disasters, events, trees, grass, whatever the environment that you do not control is made out of. Unless you believe in cloud seeding. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not. No, so like you've got environmental, you've got built world, and then the third layer that I'd say would just be, I would probably call that like people data, civilization data, which would really just be how do humans interact with one another? What is the way that we move around? Where are we located? What is the, equity, socioeconomic, all these other factors. So once you start filing that in, the way to build it in, so everyone starts with the skin. That skin, again, is taken from currently aerial view. I think there's pros and cons to that. One big issue is that it's literally just one seamless scan, right? So Cesium is, again, not to just name out dead, there's a lot of amazing companies working in this space. I work a lot with their tech. So, I'll say they have a new tool that lets you cut something out. So despite it being one big scan, you're able to take a piece out of it and either use that or just cut something out and put something else in. That's a really good addition because at the current moment, that's a massive problem that you're facing when building 3D visualizations is if a building exists here, how do I put my new building here and see what it would look like, function like, etc. Right? So that's a really awesome addition. But so all of it being like one skin is a big problem. I think that ultimately it becomes a combination between scans from above aerial. You've got BIM or CAD files that are constructed by architectural or design firms that are being implemented so you know exactly what materials are used, when was it designed, structural integrity, et cetera, et cetera. You've got the IoT world, so all of that other data floating around in midair, kind of telling you what's going on. And then you use image analysis and object segmentation to understand what various components exist in what locations in a given vicinity, so you can actually map out what that city looks like. To me, that's probably the perfect combination. Some maybe to some variation of that, but like there's no one size fits all, I'd say. And that's probably the interesting thing, at least at the moment, there's not.
Right, right. Well, because there's a resource requirement to extract that additional information about a property or the metaphysical aspects, what's actually happening around it that can't get picked up by a satellite and might have to be measured. It's human function and reaction to the world around us, and that's needs IoT, or it could be traffic patterns where you could see the road, but what are the cars actually doing? You're not going to be able to display an accident. So you have these different layers that you've described, but there's surely a cost to capture all that, and then there has to be some sort of incentive. If there's going to be a cost, why do we want to incur that to get a desired outcome? So how do you see more information about the world around us being captured and, for layman's terms, uploaded to a metaverse? What is the drive for companies or cities to do this?
So that was two questions. One was what data, or how will it be collected rather, about the world around us, and the second was why should they do it, right? So like you've got why and how. I'll start with why. Why should they do it? I would say the interesting thing is that this information, the data already exists. Like that's the thing. I'm not going to disagree that there are certainly things that we are not currently collecting that we more than likely will find out we should be. Again, that's a big area that our team has been diving into recently, is what are the gaps? Because as we've been running simulations, I mean, we've done stuff with telecommunications, emergency response, cities and municipalities, and governments. So, for us, it's interesting because we've kind of seen like a common gap. There's a common gap in almost everything ran. One, why is this so hard to do, right? Again, that's why our tools are no code. I am not a developer, for reference. I wanted to mention that earlier. Always wished I was. It just doesn't click for me, but it is definitely a benefit to come at things from the perspective of like, why can't this be easier? Because we've come to find that a lot of times it can be. And so that's a big barrier that I like knocking down, is just opening it up so everybody can do it like me, genuinely. Otherwise, I couldn't use our tools. That's one gap. Second gap would be, what is the level of accuracy for this? Like, how do I know when this was collected, who it was collected by? Like, how outdated is this? So those are kind of the three main factors: outdated, low quality or fidelity, and too technical to actually use, regardless of what it is. And so once you start looking at what data fills in that gap of will influence these simulations to either make it more real time, right? So like what influences based on real time? One example of that would be, there's a company that I've been seeing out of YC that's doing automated crack identification or and repairs. So it's an AI autonomous bot. It's driving around. It's got object recognition or segmentation. I'm assuming recognition here, identifies a crack, and it literally goes on top and covers it with cement or whatever it fills it with, and does it by itself to repair. So, for example, understanding what the current condition of a road might be would be extremely important data for supply chain and logistics, for maps and navigation solutions, for emergency response, for insurance companies, even, that are insuring really large companies with tons of vehicles. Because for all of them, how do you reduce the risk? It's avoid roads with with higher probability of a problem, which would be the worst condition. So, that is important data that could be collected. And, to bring this home, I think a lot of the data does already exist. I think that there are certainly gaps, which again, we're investigating to try to figure out what data influences simulations. But I'd say that the way that this could be collected, it already exists. There is a ton of media. There's a ton of images. They've got cameras everywhere, sensors all over that are collecting a lot of these things, but they're not using that media to derive certain types of intelligence out of it. So that would be what I'd say, is the data exists, but the intelligence being derived out of it is not what could be. There's a lot more that could be.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I was just reading a stat from IBM yesterday, which was that something like 80 to 90% of the data that exists in the world is unstructured, which generally means that we're not doing what we should with that information. It's not going into a system. It's not in rows and columns. It's not being read by AI. It just exists. And oftentimes it's fragmented or uncovered, or the quality might not be well. And so there needs to be more proactive efforts to actually scraping that, because a lot of it sits at the edge. This would be a good time to introduce, edge tech and computing, because when you are dealing with these properties, you almost need them to start to report on themselves, or else that information or that data is going to continue to sit in silos. And if we want to make traffic or development or design decisions, or as a city thinking about where should we change the flow of how people move, or where should we develop something, or critical infrastructure needs, you need all of those inputs. If you have gaps in your knowledge, the system sort of, you're introducing fractures, I guess, is sort of how I look at it. And the more fractures you have, the more compromised or less reliable the system becomes.
Yeah, and I know that, one of the interesting things too is that, like, as a part of this, obviously having an understanding of what the built world contains and how it was built and what it's structured of, a lot of that is data that is not really released, let's say. Like, it's kind of held by architecture firms, design firms, construction firm. Like, there's no one place where this exists. And so, for a lot of them, they're going to be like, why should I share this information, right? At the end of the day. And ultimately, the really interesting part is, like, you look at flood simulations. If you have a city, a little city or a town that lives right next to a river that is known to overflow a little bit, if you don't really understand how the built world was constructed, every single one of those simulations being ran is now incorrect. You can definitely understand, what would be the minimum needed in order to do ABC. But, like, at the end of the day, if you don't know what it's made of, or how it's made, or when it was constructed, or what gaps there are, or what the current condition of it is right now, this second, or as of yesterday, rather than 6 months ago, or whenever it was outdated, you're never going to know what the force of that water would actually do to that city or town. And so ultimately, you kind of need a place that is consolidating all of this types of data, so that when these simulations are ran, you genuinely can understand what ways you could avoid it, or prevent it, or remediate it after the fact, or whatever it might be that you are looking at simulating in that given scenario, let's say.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was the whole thesis behind the data room that building has, which was, we recognize that there's a lot of asset data. Some developers are using BIM, and so we know that the details are there, but it quickly becomes outdated, or it's just held with the architectural firm, or it's discarded. And if you're trying to make operational decisions, or sell the property, or redevelop at some point, you wish that you could recall that information. And so you really need it to live alongside the property. And if you upkeep that well, and the data has integrity or veracity, then that digital twin has value that mirrors the physical asset itself, which is a phenomenal abstract idea, I think.
I mean, to me, that's the if I put that future cap on of, like, all the sci-fi I grew up with, for me, I look at it and say, like, how couldn't we have a visual of how the planet is operating at a local level all the way up to the global initiative level? To me, that's the dream, I think, to an extent. Obviously, minus Big Brother type thing. Like, that's not the aim. I think that it's more of, for anyone that is listening and thinks, oh, it's going to get to Big Brother, like, unfortunately, it certainly sways in that direction. But I'd say that the right leaders will ensure that that doesn't occur. At least on my end, I look at it and say that it is extremely important for us to have that visual, because otherwise we will constantly run into issues, whether that is loss of life, or additional cost, or a burden, whatever you want to call it. All of this data that's floating around can be used for a greater good. And I think that that's ultimately what a lot of people working on this kind of technology are aiming to do. So like what you're doing too, of course, Matthew.
Yeah, I actually want to mention Ralph Montag, who was episode number 2, and he was talking about a fire. I believe it was Greenwich, and there were dozens of people, if I'm recalling correctly, that had perished. And what had happened was, in the moment, the fire department was unable to locate something critical. I'd have to retrace my conversation with him, some sort of valve that they were looking for in the building, and they couldn't find it because there weren't any plans available. And so here you have this total disconnect between first responders in the city and then what the developer did. And every second that goes by, someone is inside, their life is at risk. And so there really are situations where getting access to that information is critical.
Yeah, of course. And, I think that ultimately it's a combination between having a digital version that's readily accessible for you when you're not on site to be able to leverage. But for those that are on site, they should have the ability to layer on this data the same way that they would view it virtually, except they're in person. So, if I'm looking for that valve, I can, use augmented reality to then essentially navigate me to that location. Again, that's what we were kind of doing back in 2017, 2018 when I was working with Slice. For the retailers, we were literally like helping direct you in the store. Here's where you would go in order to buy it. So, that's been possible for a while. And I think that kind of tech is going to be pretty influential moving forward for all the things you're saying: construction, repairs, any renovations that are being done, just general maintenance in general. I think that's going to be huge.
I think it was a gas valve, if I recall correctly. But you just mentioned something here. So the retail, you're mostly focused on real estate, but you've worked with Audi and Hyundai in the past. What were some of their interests in getting into the metaverse?
Yep. So, I've been stepping away from the metaverse word. It's more
I was about to ask if that's even the right word that I should use.
Nah, I mean, maybe a couple of years ago, I would say, but like ultimately, our whole thesis has kind of stayed the same, which is we want to make it easier to create immersive experiences, plain and simple. And, some people call that the metaverse, others call it XR, others call, digital twin for the ones that reflect the real world, right? Many different terms. For me, it's really it is a 3-dimensional environment that may or may not reflect the real world around you and enables you to collaborate with others and connect with others in real time. That's the goal. We want to make that easier. So yes, Audi and Hyundai, Audi and Hyundai, they had us create a digital twin of multiple dealerships for them that they were selling cars, digital twin. And then from there, we were implementing their cars. So putting their cars in to turn it into, there were 2 purposes. First one being automating training. So when they do training for salesmen, they currently close dealerships within like a 40-mile range. They bring everybody in to like 2 dealerships or 1 place, and they cater food, and all these places are closed to train you to do something. For them, they were like, why do we have to do this? Like there's a risk, there's injury, there's, accidents, there's food costs, there's closing. So now you have less sales, all these sort of things that are costs in it. And so for them, it was looking and saying, how do you enable them to learn on site without being on site, which was the point of creating like an immersive reality for it. So it's available 24/7, 365. You could have an AI in there that, you could either be the person going to buy the car. So you could interact with an AI that would pretend to be you essentially and let you see it from the other side, or vice versa, where you have an AI come in and, be a customer that you can interact with and make sure you know all the specs of the vehicle and this. And you've got pop-ups and things like that to give you more info about the car. So you know your stuff, you get some flashcards. But that was the main purpose. And it slowly ended up evolving into just a little bit of research into whether or not it would be successful as a retail platform to enable customers to go to the dealership without going to the dealership. Because when you go in real life, you're buying, you're like ready. You've been looking for a while. So they're looking at how do they lower the barrier so you get that in-person experience, hands-on experience with a vehicle, but you don't feel the stress of going to the dealership itself. So that was really, really interesting. Honestly, that was a really, really cool project to do.
That raises an interesting point. I want to get your thoughts on this. So there's a big debate between in-person work and events versus remote and online. your technology is obviously encouraging a lot more digital interaction.
Yep.
Do you think there's a right balance here?
I mean, I think anybody that says the virtual world is better than the real world is out of their mind. And that's coming from someone building, within the space. I just personally think that for the times that we can be somewhere, it should feel more real. That's more of what I look at, is like, you can't be everywhere. That's impossible. You never will be able to. And therefore, for the moments that you can't be somewhere, like, what if you could? Like, I guess in my head, like, that's kind of where my head goes, to either just see what's going on, like, how's this working, like, bird's eye view, or even on the floor, like, I'm there. But if you're there, you get all the benefits that you would get from the digital world around us, which, we have. So, but I'm certainly not going to look at you and say, if they were to do that, the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park, if they were to do that whole pitch, that elevator pitch, and that was virtual, come on, like, it would not have had any impact on my life, genuinely,
Right. Right.
And so I do feel that when it comes to balance, I think that if you can be in person, you should be in person. No question. But I think, again, like, you don't have to be every second of every day. I think that having flexibility is really important from just a health and mental health perspective of, you control your day a little bit more. You don't have the stress of being on the road and having that horrible drive into work, which just distorts your entire day. Start on your own wave a little bit. And I think that that's a really good thing to have. So, I mean, in terms of balance, I can't really say. I think everybody is different, but I do think that there are things that I've at least found that the virtual world has not been able to replicate yet, I'll say, because I won't say it won't happen. I just am yet to see it happen in that regard. So, I guess time will tell there.
Do you think Agora will have a big impact on the future of work, or is that
depends on type of work? I mean,
okay.
Yeah, I say that because I think that at least for the areas that I'm mainly focused on now of really impacting, like, it's the physical world. I was thinking a lot of the stuff that we were building and working on, like, again, it was an interesting analysis looking at the data, and you're seeing the ones that built the real world ones had the biggest impact in a way. Like, that was interesting because to me, like, I've always kind of wondered, like, what do these virtual experiences really bring? Like, what was the impact they really had on people? And I think that collaboration, real-time connection is a big thing of, you're with someone when you're not. Like, I've got a ton of friends I used to play video games with growing up, and it felt like we were together. Like, I'll tell you that much. Even though I never saw their face, like, I heard their voice, I saw their avatar and their gamer tag. That's it. And that's really all that mattered. And it was because we were sharing an experience together. It was the memories that we had that made our connection so real. And I think that that's something that there's a lot to learn from in a way as well of, don't take first mess, like, get to know people, actually do things together. Don't just sit in a circle and stare at your phone together. Which I think, unfortunately, the real world has turned into quite a bit. But I do think that, the real world has a lot of things that we can't get virtually. I hope that might change so that every moment feels like we're all really together, and like maybe we will feel more connected just as humanity as a whole when we can really all be in the same room together at the same time, sitting at the same table, again, like, we can kind of do it, but like, it's not as real as all of us getting on a plane and sitting at the same table together. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, the same way that we're conducting this podcast on a screen, one nice step further would be maybe a three-dimensional element where you're not just literally my screen.
We have headsets on, or we're sitting,
right. We're sitting
in a room.
Exactly. I think that sort of immersive element would be a lot of fun, and then you'd have just more interactiveness and opportunity for exploration. We
Agreed.
could pull up a graphic and look over in that direction, and there it is before us. As opposed to here, I look around and I see my ring light. So we're very constrained to what's happening in front of us, but definitely, and it does lower the barrier to entry. The fact that I can run a podcast without having a studio is phenomenal. Otherwise, it'd be very costly. And such is the case with many of the business applications that I think you're working to resolve were traditionally the technical investments and the skilled labor you'd have to bring in to carefully design these systems or implement the technology and develop a digital twin. It's steep, and that has been off-putting for a lot of, we'll say, people in real estate, and hence why they didn't bother. And that data left, was left unutilized and unstructured.
Yeah, like, I mean, for real estate agents, right? One of those things, like 4 years ago, we had one client who we were working with where the goal was to try to create a 3D model of the inside of all their properties, right? And they had hundreds. And the big problem, was basically, we did like one or two. And I mean, a couple years ago, higher barrier a little bit. But a big thing that they were saying was, oh my God, like, do you really have to go capture new media? We have images, we've gotten videos of all these properties already, right? That's the key. And a couple of years ago, couldn't do anything with that. Right now, like, we've been doing a few different projects where we're literally taking images or videos you have of a property, and you're able to mesh it together into a 3D model. So you don't even need to go rescan or anything. So, like, to me, I look at like those kind of evolutions of massive democratization because, to go and take a 3D scan today is something that would be relatively high barrier. Your phone can do a pretty good job depending on the type of phone you've got, honestly. I take a bunch. It does a great job for a phone. That's a key for a phone. But once we get to a point where you're just essentially capturing images and videos, it interprets the depth on your behalf and combines it into a mesh. You're going to have 3D models that are created out of just images and videos, which is super low barrier, and anybody can take those. And so, to me, that's exciting because I think that we're going to enter a phase where we don't realize it, but we're essentially all mapping the Earth together. And I think that that's a really cool thing.
Well, in some ways, we're already participating in that.
We are.
I can think of two examples. Number one, the little robots that clean your house. A lot of people don't realize that they're mapping out their
I don't have
floor
one
plan.
because of that.
Yeah. But the other thing is when you're on Google Maps and you're stuck in traffic, you're contributing to that data that says I'm stuck in traffic, and this is informing other people. Someone else gets to avoid the traffic that you're stuck in because of your lived experience. And there's all just different sorts of ways. Another example, you can go on Google Maps and I can manually take a 360 picture of where I'm standing, and someone can then drop the pin and see, oh, this is kind of what it looks like. It doesn't have depth or detail, but we're mapping out the world in that way.
100%. No, 100%. I definitely am not disagreeing there. My comment was not to say that we haven't been doing it already, but I think that we're slowly entering a phase where we're literally co-creating the map together rather than a random collection of images that are mapped. Like, we are essentially taking it's like taking all of those different pins of these 360-degree images and meshing it together into one giant image. That's essentially what's occurring. And to me, I think that that's really exciting. It's very interesting.
So what are the use cases that you're most focused on right now? And what are the customers that are interested in those use cases?
Yeah,
what types of customers?
Absolutely. So site planning is a big one of, I've got a location that I need to construct or design or configure. So we've been doing stuff with Red Cross for emergency site planning. So being able to actually say, hey, here's 5 sites that we've got. Here's the tents, the size of the tents, the pallets, the ambulances, blah, blah, blah. Here's the amount of people we're going to have, et cetera. Essentially configure these sites, like just use AI to help try to break down what kind of configurations you could have. And then you could layer on data such as, floodplain, for example, and say, hey, in the event of X amount of water, we know that the water is going to go here and that this historically has become a floodplain. And therefore, if this disaster is related to, rain or water of any amount above X, you cannot use this site. You should use X site, which has much lower risk for that. Same thing could go for things like, we've been doing things with music festivals, conferences as well, very similarly for that regard. Festivals, things like that. Large scale simulation, essentially. What do you do for A, B, C, D, E, F, G to remediate risk? So that's been a lot of fun. That one I've actually really, really enjoyed. Let's see. Telecommunications has been a fun one. That one takes a while to close, though, I gotta say. But at least in the pilots, it's mainly been 5G expansion. So they're looking at where they need to place 5G towers, mainly in the state of California. So we were mapping out essentially 3D model of the whole state with every cell tower that's currently in operation, current coverage area, bandwidth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we were working on modifying, utilizing various types of disparate data from socioeconomic data for like equity, for terrain and topography as it relates to sustainability. So least amount of towers needed to cover certain areas, and then population density, of course, related to the highest profit opportunity. So you've got profit, equity, sustainability being three of the main factors that they're looking at hitting, right? And so with them working to say, where should we be placing new towers or nodes essentially to cover the most amount of areas or the most amount of people in the least amount of towers. So that one's been really interesting too. Just very neat seeing how these systems work, to be honest with you. I never really realized why it breaks when I fall and go through a tunnel. And it was just because they didn't take into account when they put the tower here, they didn't take into account how thick the mountain was, how many trees are in the way, what type of tree it is, how thick it is, and therefore the range only goes to here. Like that wasn't calculated in the response as much. And so that, they typically walk around with a physical receiver. Ours enables them to have a virtual receiver, essentially. And just based on all of this data to see how would the coverage break down as it goes through a forest or a mountain or whatever, in a valley, etc.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I have to say, there's a lot of data that it could start to become overwhelming. Are you guys implementing or trying to use artificial intelligence in any way so that you don't have to granularly assess where every single cell tower goes? It can identify the best locations?
Yeah, so that's something we've been it's great that you say that. That's something we've been investigating. We just partnered with a team called EDX Technologies down in Texas, and they have been doing wireless simulation for about 20 years, so maybe more. So they have the models that would be able to do a lot of that analysis on your behalf already. And so rather than going and building our own, we're simply partnering with them and providing the 3D infrastructure that will power their simulations. And so rather than being able to just see, a aerial view 2D map type thing with, basic hills, we're able to implement higher quality visuals that would enable that simulation to more eerily reflect the real world around you, as well as include disparate data sets that could also then be visualized. So you actually see a bigger picture of how this thing is working and operating. So yeah, as much as I'd love to build one of my own on that regard, in this case, it made more sense to skip a step and go partner with the guys that have been doing it already.
Right.
So we went that route, but the answer is yes. 1,000,000% has to be utilized to scale that, because there's no way any human is going to be able to do that by themselves. There's too much to analyze.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other areas in the digital twin space where you think AI is going to be super effective?
I mean, site selection, I'll say, in that, Walmart is picking a new location, instead of flying above and picking all these, they're flying above in a plane, and then they go on the ground and they take a look at the ground and the parking lot and the neighborhood, and then they look at this data, that data. For me, just having an AI that they could type in, we're opening a Walmart, the goal is this many square feet, and we're looking for an area that has X amount of population with Y amount of income and this low crime, whatever. And it will do its search and identify, like, here's 10 different cities you could go and open up in. And it's like, okay, well, I need land that is X big. You find me a plot of land that's available that's this big, and then it will find, here's a list of the options of the land that you could buy, and here's the prices of those and where they're located and the data behind it. To me, like things like that should probably, I would assume, will end up becoming pretty democratized. Same thing with configuration of, again, right now, a lot of the things we've been doing has been like drag and drop placement. But again, like we've been starting to utilize AI for the idea of like, well, how many iterations could it help us run and how quickly, for how big, knowing how big the site is and then how many of X fit where, like how quickly could that do versus us. And I mean, at least the preliminary tests have shown it's exponential compared to what we're capable of ourselves. So I think things along those lines, but also just identifying things in the real world, or at least helping you with at scale identifying things in the real world, whatever that might be that you're looking at identifying. Like, I think you could train it to learn anything theoretically. So, you show it enough something, it more than likely identify it.
Yeah. And as long as it's been trained with proper I mess up that word, but I'm going to use proper data sets, and then the predictions could be a lot more intelligent. One example I think of is when I'm plugging in my traffic routes to Atlanta, it tells me that it's going to be an hour 30 to get there based off of current traffic conditions. But everyone knows that come 4:30 p.m. or something close, it totally changes and it becomes a 2.5 hour trip. And just basic intelligence to say, well, based off of historical data about the city, we know that this is not actually going to be a 1 hour, 30-minute trip. That same time every day, traffic accumulates here. And so your trip is going to be this long. And you could start to do the same with any facet of a city where there's historical data, IoT is picking this up, or other means of scanning what's going on. And we start to inform intelligence and generate that wisdom. You were mentioning the flood patterns where we see that this floods at this spot, this time of year. It'd be a really bad place to set up a camp or a site or pallets, and because we know that something, even if it's not happening now, is going to happen. Like, let's foreshadow this, look into the future.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting things that we can pull out of the world around us, and definitely not going to disagree with anything you said there.
So one of my final questions is kind of coming around challenges and barrier to entry. What was really holding us back from widespread adoption of this technology?
I think it's a good question. Number one, technical barrier. Once you drop technical barrier, cost goes with it. So that means time's reduced to do, and the cost in order to do both come down substantially. And the skill gap, that's fantastic. That is the best case scenario. So I think that's the number one barrier, is to bring those down. Number two would be making sense of our data. As you said, like, there's a lot of unstructured data, and that unstructured data, at least in my head, like, you've got how many cameras out here videoing or taking images of how many places? What's that image? What is that actually used for, right? It's really used for, does anyone steal? Does anyone kill anyone? The occasional car accident you need footage of. That's it. There's like practically nothing else that is derived out of those images, out of that imagery. It's unstructured in my head. I view that as unstructured. Why? Because there's a lot more intelligence that I believe could be derived out of things like that. Same thing with sensors, same thing with IoT devices. So I think that would be number two, is just making sense of what data we actually have, and how can we derive more insights out of it than we currently are. Like, what value could be brought out of it? I think that to me would be another big barrier that needs to be overcome. And then three would just be, I think, digital twin doesn't necessarily need to be 3D. I think that you can have a very equal representation of something from the physical world without 3D, technically speaking. I think 3D makes it make more sense visually, because we are spatial beings, just the way our brains work. Like, if you think of your house, you think and you like picture the 3-dimensional house, or like the rooms and the hallways, like you'll draw it out yourself in 3D. That's the way we work. So I think that democratizing just how we capture 3D content and imagery will also be a really big factor that plays a role into this. And that isn't to say that people just don't overcome the idea of continuing to do the traditional and being willing to try new things before maybe they work perfectly. Because these sort of things are coming, so I think reluctancy would be the other thing of potentially overcoming. Just be more willing to try and experiment and be ahead of the curve. And, if it doesn't work, at least you can say, like, I understand something that others around me that I'm competing against have no idea is even occurring right now. And to me, that's a huge edge, huge edge. So those are kind of the things that I think should be overcome in that regard.
Yeah, we say that all the time in real estate. It's the innovative culture that people need to adopt and go out there and see what's happening, and it can help them find an edge and get ahead of their competitors. Because likely if you're not implementing it, another company, your competitor is, or an institution is, they're definitely ahead of the curve. They don't always publicly announce it.
Or startup is.
Yeah. So there's lots of chances to implement new workflows, new tech, and really accelerate and scale.
No disagreement there.
What does 2025 look like for Agora? What are some plans and items in the roadmap?
Yeah, so we've got a few exciting things happening here. Got a few deals that are ongoing right now that we're, certainly be announcing those when they close there, but it would be an extremely large investment and partnership with a very large architectural design firm. And that would bring, opportunities to get more involved with municipalities, projects that they already have ongoing, simplifying workflows of theirs using our tools, and just further democratizing the ability to create these visualizations and simulations, which is really exciting. On another end, we did recently partner with AWS and Oracle, and we're beginning to do a little bit of work with them related towards infrastructure monitoring and assessment. So trying to understand what the world consists of around us and how can we maybe automate some of these processes for maintenance, repairs, or remediations, things like that. There's so many moving parts, and the world is a big place, and it's hard to see what is happening everywhere. And so our aim is really looking at how do we utilize data that exists to better inform our maintenance teams and decision makers so that we can make these improvements or, improve our resiliency, all those sort of things much quicker rather than being reactive, be proactive, as you said earlier. So yeah, those would be the main really exciting pieces there. And then we're doing a little bit on the insurance side too. So really looping in with insurance companies and trying to understand with them, like what kind of goals they would have out of this, because for them, data and intelligence is gold. It helps inform their decisions, the premiums that they charge, things like that. So really looking at, how could this technology be used to, number one, influence the things we mentioned. So sustainability, resiliency, equity, things like that. But on the second end, how could it lower risk and therefore lower premiums? So if you have a property, you have a location, a municipality that, the environment itself is in fantastic shape and condition, and its resilience and all these sort of things, and maybe you get lower rates because you are in a better position. You follow guidelines that others are not following, and therefore the risk is reduced for the insurance company and for you, and everyone can win. And so I look at it and say, like, how could you try to create something that works well for everybody? Because regardless, if you go to one end, the other's going to be pissed, and vice versa. So to me, it's both of these teams have to be extremely excited about this, because I think that this current situation we've got going with this is not working.
The insurance use case is really interesting. We talk about the same thing at building. If you're gathering this assets information, you're holding on to it, you're being more transparent, you could see better premiums, lower cost of capital, the overall risk as it's perceived to lenders and investors is reduced, and you just know what that property is worth, how it's going to perform, and what the future has in store for it. So we're absolutely on the same page about what you can do with that data. Awesome.
Yeah, no question there. That's awesome.
So as a quick CTA call to action, any partnerships or customers that you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, look, we do a lot with it's mainly architectural design firms. They're the ones that we've been finding have a big gap with trying to visualize new construction and properties that they're building out and designing for teams. And so, our tool helps generate the 3D assets in literally minutes, rather than having to fly a drone up and take the videos or take the scans themselves. Like, we can really help with that. So that would be number one. And then honestly, anyone trying to make more sense of the world around them. Like, if you're looking at deriving insights out of your physical environment, that's what we specialize in. And we specialize in making it easy enough that anybody can use these tools. So, please reach out. Would love to help you with making sense of your reality. ultimately.
Awesome. Well, Ethan, it's been a really fantastic conversation.
Thanks for having me.
About digital twins and the interactivity of the world and all the different layers that need to come into consideration. Super intriguing crossroad of a lot of technologies and industries and relevant things that are happening. I really think you're at the cutting edge with this type of stuff.
I appreciate that a lot, honestly. There's always more happening. That's the thing I'd say is every day there's something new. So you think you're on the cutting edge until you see something new, like, oh, I've got to catch up now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that we hope to highlight for listeners, of the show. What's going on in the world? How can they tune in and how they can implement it?
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for having me today. I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for coming on. Hope to have you in the future because you're definitely going to be doing some awesome things. And thank you, of course, to all of our listeners who have joined us. Ethan, Berg, one final question. Where can people find you? LinkedIn, I'm guessing, andLl have links to your website in the
LinkedIn,
show notes
absolutely. And I'll make sure to share with you. I'll share like our Twitter, like Instagram, I guess.
I do have those links,
also.
So those will be
perfect.
In the description. People can find that.
But LinkedIn is definitely, if you ping me on LinkedIn, I'm very quick to respond.
Awesome. Cool. Well, wishing you all the best, Ethan.
Again.
Take care now.